My father called me 52 times in one day, not to check on me, not because he cared. He wanted the inheritance my grandmother left, and he was willing to use my sister's rent as a weapon to force my hand. He said if I didn't pay up, he'd take me to court, drag my name through mud, and make sure I never saw a dime. What he didn't know, my grandmother had already rewritten her will. In her own handwriting, she left everything to me. And that phone call. It was the last time he ever tried to control my money. I didn't always understand what that document meant. For years, I thought the inheritance was a myth my grandmother used to keep my father in line. But when she passed, I learned the truth. She had watched everything, the favoritism, the neglect, the way he treated me like a wallet with legs instead of a daughter, and she made a choice. A quiet choice that bypassed every assumption my family had built their plans on. So when my father called 52 times in a single day, demanding I cover my sister's rent or lose everything, he didn't realize he was already holding empty leverage. The real power was sitting in my name alone. This is the story of how a dead woman's handwriting changed everything. I was 9 the first time I understood how my family really worked. My sister broke a vase in the living room, an antique my grandmother had handed down to my mother. She ran to my father crying, and he wrapped his arms around her and told her it didn't matter, accidents happen. She was still his perfect girl. I watched from the hallway. I hadn't done anything wrong. But later that night, when I asked for help with a school project, he told me to figure it out. "You're so independent," he said. "You don't need me holding your hand." That was the first time I heard those words used as a weapon wrapped in a compliment. My grandmother saw it. She lived 4 hours away in a small house with a garden she tended herself. We visited twice a year, holidays and a week in summer. She never said much in front of my father. But when she found me alone, she'd ask questions that cut straight through the performance. "How are you really doing? Are they taking care of you?" I was too young to understand what she was protecting, but I felt it. She was the only person who looked at me like I was the investment, not the backup. By the time I turned 14, the pattern was carved so deep I stopped trying to name it. My sister got a car on her 16th birthday. Not used, not practical, a new sedan my father picked out himself. I got a bus pass and a lecture about building character. I remember standing at the kitchen counter holding that plastic card while my sister posed for photos in the driveway. My mother snapped pictures. My father straightened the bow on the hood. I walked to my room and closed the door. That night, my grandmother called. She didn't mention the car. She asked what book I was reading. Then she said something I didn't fully grasp until years later. "Your father mistakes money for love. Don't make the same mistake." I didn't know what she meant then. I do now. She was telling me that his favoritism wasn't about resources. It was about control. He poured everything into my sister because she made him feel powerful. He gave me nothing because I reminded him that love shouldn't need a price tag. High school ended with the same math I'd been doing my whole life. My sister's college applications got a personal consultation from my father. He called admissions offices, attended tour, bought her a new laptop. Mine got a stack of financial aid pamphlets and a reminder that I was pragmatic and resourceful. I applied to state schools, local ones, anything I could afford without asking for a dime. I got in. I got scholarships that covered tuition. My father said, "Good, that saves us the trouble." He didn't come to orientation. He didn't help me move into the dorm. I packed a single suitcase, took the bus to campus, and set up my room alone. My roommate's parents brought a mini fridge and a rug. I brought a stack of second-hand textbooks and the quiet determination to never need anyone again. My grandmother sent me a card that first week, $20 inside and a note that said, "Buy yourself something that makes you smile. You've earned it." I kept that card for years. College was survival. I won't romanticize it. I worked 3 jobs to pay for rent and food. I learned what it meant to be truly alone, not the kind of alone where people forget to call you, but the kind where no one even knows you're struggling because they never asked. I called my grandmother every Sunday. She never missed a call. She asked about my classes, my work, my friends. She talked about her garden, her neighbor's cat, the book she was reading. Those calls were the only thread connecting me to the idea of family. Meanwhile, my sister's life bloomed on social media. She posted photos from vacations I wasn't invited on, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, shopping trips my father funded with a smile. I saw every post. I didn't block her because I wanted to remember exactly what I was walking away from. Then the summer before my senior year, my grandmother got sick. It happened fast, a stroke, a hospital stay. My mother called to tell me with a voice that sounded more inconvenienced than worried. I took the first bus home. When I walked into her room, she was pale and thin, but her eyes still had that sharp glint. She squeezed my hand and said, "You came, of course you came." I stayed for 3 days. My father visited once for 20 minutes. My sister didn't visit at all. Before I left, my grandmother pulled me close and whispered something I almost missed. "I fixed it. Don't let them take what's yours." I thought she was confused from the medication. I told her to rest. She shook her head and gripped my wrist. "The will, I changed it, you'll see." I didn't know what to say. I told her I loved her and promised to call. She died 2 weeks later. The funeral was a performance. My father stood at the front delivering a eulogy about her generous spirit. My sister cried on cue. I sat in the back row and felt nothing but a cold certainty that something was about to break. The reading of the will happened at a lawyer's office downtown. My father, my mother, my sister, and me. The lawyer opened a folder and began reading. My grandmother had left her house, her savings, and her personal belongings to be divided equally between her children and grandchildren. My father nodded, satisfied. Then the lawyer paused. "There is also a separate document," he said, "signed and notarized 6 months before her death." He pulled out a single page. My father's expression tightened. The lawyer read it aloud. My grandmother had established a trust in my name alone. The house was transferred to that trust. A separate savings account containing $87,000 was designated solely for me. She had written a note attached to the document. "This is for the child they forgot to invest in." The room went silent. My father's face turned a color I'd never seen. He stood up, knocked his chair over, and started shouting. "That's not possible. She wasn't in her right mind. We'll contest this." The lawyer calmly explained that my grandmother had been evaluated by 2 independent physicians who certified her mental competence. The document was ironclad. My father walked out without another word. My sister followed him, crying again. My mother looked at me with something between shock and accusation. I sat there holding the paper in my hands, reading my grandmother's handwriting over and over. She had done this. She had planned this. For the next 3 months, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, no explanations. I assumed they had accepted it. I was wrong. The silence was not acceptance. It was strategy. And it ended with 52 phone calls in a single day. The first call came at 7:43 in the morning. I was still half asleep, reaching for my phone on the nightstand, expecting a work alert or a wrong number. Instead, my father's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. Voicemail. He didn't leave a message. The second call came at 7:51. I silenced it. Third call at 7:58. Fourth at 8:02. By 8:15, I had missed 9 calls from the same number. My phone vibrated across the wooden desk like it had a pulse of its own. I finally answered the 10th call because I knew he wouldn't stop. His voice was clipped, controlled, the tone he used when he was trying to sound reasonable while making unreasonable demands. "We need to talk about the trust. Your sister has expenses. Rent bills, the boutique launch. You're going to cover it until we sort out the legal situation." I asked him what legal situation. He said they were filing a challenge to the will. Undue influence, he called it. They would argue that my grandmother was coerced, manipulated, not in her right mind when she signed the document. They had found a lawyer willing to take the case. I told him the will was validated by 2 independent physicians. He said doctors make mistakes. I told him the trust was ironclad. He said nothing is ironclad when a family member is involved. Then he delivered the ultimatum. "If you don't start paying your sister's rent today, I will make sure this drags through court for years. I'll drain every dollar of that trust in legal fees. I'll call your employer. I'll tell them what kind of daughter you really are." I hung up. He called back. 27th call, 28th, 31st. Each time the same demand, the same threat, the same refusal to accept that I held the winning card. By noon, I had 43 missed calls. I turned off my phone, walked to the kitchen, and stood there staring at the wall. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the clarity of seeing him so clearly for the first time. He wasn't fighting for my sister. He was fighting for control. He had lost at the moment my grandmother signed that paper, and he would do anything to get it back. The 44th call came while I was making tea. I let it go to voicemail. This time he left a message. His voice was different, softer, almost pleading. "Sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but this is family. Your sister is struggling. Please just help us out. We'll figure the rest out later." I played it twice, then I deleted it. He called 4 more times that evening, 48, 49, 50, 51, each one chipping away at the space I was trying to hold. I didn't answer. I sat on my couch with my grandmother's will in my hands, reading her handwriting again. "This is for the child they forgot to invest in." I thought about what she would want me to do. I thought about what I wanted to do. They weren't the same thing. The 52nd call came at 11:08 p.m. I picked up, not because I wanted to talk, because I wanted it to end. "Listen," I said before he could start. "I'm not paying her rent. I'm not funding the boutique. I'm not doing anything until the court decides. And if you call me one more time tonight, I'm blocking your number." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You'll regret this." I hung up. I didn't block his number. I wanted to see what he would do next. The next morning, I drove to my grandmother's house, the house that now belonged to me. I had the keys in my hand, but I hadn't stepped inside since the funeral. The driveway was overgrown. The mailbox was stuffed with flyers. I unlocked the front door and walked into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as she left it. The floral couch, the ceramic cat figurines, the bookshelf packed with worn paperbacks. I walked through the kitchen and found a notepad on the counter. Her handwriting, slightly shaky from the stroke, listed groceries and a reminder to water the roses. I sat down at her kitchen table and cried for the first time since she died. I spent the afternoon going through her things. In her bedroom closet, tucked behind a stack of blankets, I found a shoebox. Inside were letters, dozens of them tied with a rubber band, all addressed to me, all never sent. I opened the first one, dated 8 years ago. "Dear Mallory, I watched your father ignore your birthday again. I wanted to send you something, but I knew he would intercept it. So I'm writing this letter instead. One day you'll know how much I saw. One day you'll know I was on your side." I read every letter. She had been documenting my life from a distance, recording every slight, every favor, every moment she wished she could step in. The last letter was dated 2 weeks before her death. "I'm tired, sweetheart, and I'm scared, not of dying, of leaving you unprotected, but I think I've done enough. The trust is set. The doctors signed. No one can take it from you. I love you more than I ever said out loud." I sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by paper proof that someone had been paying attention. That someone had seen me. That even at a distance, my grandmother had been my witness. The legal challenge came fast. My father filed a petition for undue influence 3 weeks later. The court set a hearing date. I had to hire a lawyer. I used money from the trust to pay the retainer. My lawyer was a woman named Priya Shah. She specialized in contested wills. She was sharp, direct, and didn't waste time on sentiment. "Your father's case is weak," she told me after reviewing the documents. "He's claiming your grandmother was coerced, but the medical certifications are solid. The independent evaluations are clear. He's grasping at straws." "Then why fight it?" I asked. "Because he can drag it out," she said. "Make it expensive, make it exhausting. Some people don't want to win. They just want to punish you for having something they can't control." She told me what to expect: depositions, discovery, a long, drawn-out process designed to wear me down. She told me my father might try to subpoena my financial records, my emails, even my grandmother's personal correspondence. She told me to be prepared for the invasion. I wasn't prepared. The first deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the lawyer's office in a stiff blazer that felt like armor. My father was already there, sitting in the waiting room with his own attorney, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. He didn't look at me. My lawyer led me into a conference room. We sat across from a court reporter and the opposing counsel. The questions started simple. When did you last see your grandmother? What was her mental state? Did she ever mention changing her will? Then they got sharper. Did you pressure her? Did you visit her more often after she got sick? Did you isolate her from the rest of the family? Each question was designed to paint me as the manipulator. I answered calmly, truthfully. I told them I visited because I loved her. I told them she was lucid until the end. I told them I had nothing to hide. But the strategy was working. I felt it, the slow erosion of certainty, the weight of being accused of something I didn't do. After 3 hours, we broke for lunch. My lawyer pulled me aside. "He's going to keep pushing," she said. "He's going to try to make you angry, make you slip, make you say something you regret. Don't give him that satisfaction." I didn't, but I also started to see something I hadn't noticed before. My father wasn't just fighting the will. He was fighting me, not because of the money, because of what the money represented. Independence, freedom, the one thing he could never control. The deposition continued for 2 more days. Each session left me drained. By the end of the week, I had answered over 500 questions. My father's attorney had tried every angle. Nothing stuck. Then, on Friday evening, my lawyer called with news that changed everything. "They found something," she said. "Your grandmother's medical records. There's a note from her primary care physician dated 3 months before she died. It says she asked about estate planning. She specifically requested information about trusts and beneficiary designations. She was lucid. She was proactive." "That helps us," I said. "It gets better. The doctor's notes also mention that she expressed concern about your father's financial habits. She told the doctor she was worried he would try to take her assets after she passed. She said, and I quote, 'He's always been entitled. He won't stop when I'm gone.'" I felt the air leave my lungs. She knew. She had known exactly what he would do, and she had planned for it. My lawyer continued. "We have documentation showing she met with an estate attorney twice. She signed the trust documents in front of witnesses. She paid for the entire process out of her own account. There is no evidence of coercion whatsoever. Your father's case is going to collapse." But it didn't collapse. Not yet. Because my father had one more weapon in his arsenal, one that I hadn't seen coming. The next week, I received a certified letter from his attorney. They were requesting a mental health evaluation. For me, their argument. If my grandmother was not unduly influenced, then perhaps I had manipulated her into believing I was the only trustworthy heir. They wanted to examine my psychological state, my motivations, my relationship with my grandmother. My lawyer was furious. "This is a fishing expedition," she said. "He's trying to paint you as unstable." "It won't work," I said. "I have nothing to hide." But I knew the truth. I was shaky. I was exhausted. I was grieving. And I was terrified that if they looked closely enough, they would find the cracks I had been hiding for years. The evaluation was scheduled for the following month. I spent the intervening weeks preparing, not for the exam itself, but for the possibility that my father might actually win. That the court might believe I was the one who had manipulated a dying woman. I started looking through my grandmother's house again. I found more letters, more documents, more evidence of her deliberate planning. In a desk drawer, I found a copy of her original will, the one she had before she changed it. It left everything to my father. She had crossed out his name and written mine in blue ink. She had dated it and initialed it. I took it to my lawyer. She scanned it, then looked up with a thin smile. "This is gold. It shows a clear intent to disinherit your father. She literally scratched him out and wrote you in. No court can argue with that." The hearing date arrived. I walked into the courtroom wearing the same stiff blazer. My father was already seated at the plaintiff's table. He looked older, tired. The fight had taken something out of him, too. The judge listened to arguments from both sides. My lawyer presented the medical records, the letters, the crossed-out will. The opposing counsel tried to argue that my grandmother had been confused, manipulated, pressured. But the evidence was overwhelming. After 2 hours, the judge made a ruling. The will was valid. The trust was valid. The challenge was dismissed with prejudice. My father could not refile. I sat in the courtroom as the words sank in. I had won. Legally, financially, completely. But as I stood to leave, my father turned to me. His eyes were red. His voice was low. "You think this is over," he said. "You don't know what I have on your grandmother. You don't know what she did." I stopped. I looked at him. "What are you talking about?" He leaned closer. "Come to the house tomorrow, alone. I'll show you something that changes everything." He walked out. I stood frozen in the courtroom, my grandmother's victory suddenly feeling fragile. The next day, I drove to my childhood home. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know if I was walking into a trap, but I had to know. My father met me at the door. He looked nervous. He led me to the study and handed me a manila envelope. "Open it." Inside was a photograph. An old photograph, faded and creased. It showed my grandmother standing next to a man I didn't recognize. They were holding hands. Behind them was a building with a sign I couldn't read. "Who is this?" I asked. My father's voice was flat. "That's the man she left your grandfather for, the man she loved, the man she kept secret for 40 years. She had an affair. She broke up a marriage. She lied to everyone. And she used that guilt to rewrite her will. She wasn't protecting you. She was trying to buy her way into heaven." I looked at the photograph. I looked at my father. And I realized the battle wasn't over. It had just taken a turn I never expected. I studied the photograph for an hour that night, trying to see what my father wanted me to see. A woman in love with a man who wasn't her husband. A secret kept for 4 decades. It was supposed to make me doubt her. It was supposed to make me question every letter, every phone call, every act of protection she had given me. But it didn't. I looked at her face in that faded image. She wasn't hiding. She was smiling. Open, unguarded, the kind of smile I had never seen in our family photos. She looked free, and I realized my father had handed me the wrong weapon. He thought this was dirt. It was evidence that she had one person in her life who wasn't part of his world. I started digging. I called my Aunt Meredith, the one who had always watched from the edges. I asked about the man in the photo. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Henry. His name was Henry Chen. He was a civil engineer. They met in 1972. He was married. She was married. They never acted on it for years, but after your grandfather died, she went to him. They had 6 years together before he passed. Lung cancer." "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Because your father made it a shameful secret. He found out when he was going through her papers after the funeral. He threatened to tell everyone if she didn't give him control of the estate. That's when she changed the will." The pieces clicked. My grandmother hadn't acted out of guilt. She had acted out of self-defense. My father had tried to blackmail her. She responded by removing his leverage permanently. I called my lawyer the next morning. "We need to request his financial records," I said. "Bank statements, credit card bills, anything that shows he had access to her accounts before she died." "It's a fishing expedition," Priya said. "No, it's a counterpunch." The subpoena was served within a week. My father's attorney fought it, but the judge allowed limited discovery. What came back was worse than I imagined. For 3 years before my grandmother's death, my father had been making unauthorized withdrawals from her checking account. Small amounts at first, 200, 300, always in cash, enough to stay under the radar. Then larger ones after the stroke, 5,000, 8,000. He had taken over $20,000 in the 6 months before she died. The bank records showed something else. My grandmother had noticed. She had flagged 2 of the larger withdrawals to the branch manager. The manager documented her concerns in a file note. "Customer reports possible unauthorized access. Recommends changing PIN and account monitoring." She knew her son was stealing from her, and she didn't report him. She didn't confront him. She redirected her estate instead. I sat with that information for days. My father, the man who had spent his life painting himself as the responsible patriarch, had been quietly robbing his own mother. And when she caught him, she didn't call the police. She called a lawyer and wrote me into her will. The second deposition was scheduled. This time I brought the bank records. My father's attorney tried to block them. The judge allowed them. I watched my father's face as the documents were entered into evidence. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands gripped the table. Priya handled the questioning. "Did you make these withdrawals from your mother's account?" His attorney objected. The judge overruled. "I was helping her manage her finances," he said. She asked me to handle things while she was sick. The bank records show she reported unauthorized access 6 months before her stroke. I don't recall that. The branch manager's file note was read into the record. Customer reports possible unauthorized access. The date, the time, the manager's signature. My father's voice cracked. She was confused. She was old. The same woman who was evaluated by 2 independent physicians and found to be of sound mind when she signed her trust documents. He had no answer. The deposition ended early. My father left without looking at me. His attorney stayed behind, shuffling papers, refusing to meet my eyes. The next week, my lawyer received a letter. My father was dropping the challenge. No further action. No appeal. He would not contest the will. Priya called me with the news. It's over. He's done. But I knew it wasn't over. Not really, because the phone calls didn't stop. The first one came the same evening. Blocked number. I didn't answer. Voicemail. You think you won? You think that money makes you better than us? Your grandmother was a cheat and a liar and you're just like her. I deleted it. The next day, another call. Same number. I'm telling everyone. The family, her friends, the neighbors. They'll know what she did. They'll know what you did. I didn't respond. Then the text started. Random numbers, different area codes. You're dead to us. I hope that house burns down. Your sister hates you. Your mother cries every night because of you. I saved every message. I went back to my grandmother's house and sat in her living room. The letters were spread across the coffee table. The shoebox was open. I read the last one again. I'm tired, sweetheart, and I'm scared, not of dying, of leaving you unprotected, but I think I've done enough. She had done more than enough. She had given me a weapon I didn't know I needed. I called my lawyer the next morning. I want to file a restraining order. Against your father. Against all of them. My father, my mother, my sister. The harassment has to stop. Priya was quiet. You understand what that means, right? You're cutting them off completely. Legal boundaries that can't be crossed. I know. It will make the family situation permanent. Irreversible. It's already permanent. They just refuse to see it. The papers were filed. The judge granted a temporary order. A hearing was scheduled for the final order. I had to appear in person. So did my father. The hearing was 3 weeks later. I walked into the courthouse with a folder containing screenshots, voicemail transcripts, and a log of every call, every text, every message. My father was already there, sitting alone on a bench. He looked small, defeated. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The hearing was brief. I presented the evidence. My father's lawyer tried to argue that the calls were expressions of frustration, not threats. The judge didn't buy it. The permanent restraining order was granted. My father was prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly. Any violation would result in criminal charges. As I left the courthouse, I saw my mother and sister standing by the entrance. They had come to watch. My mother's face was streaked with tears. My sister's was hard, cold. She stepped forward. You think you're so righteous, she said. You think you won, but you lost a family. You lost everyone who ever cared about you. I looked at her. I thought about the Mercedes, the bus, the 52 calls, the bank records. I didn't lose anything, I said. I finally found the door. I walked past them and didn't look back. The house was mine. The money was mine. The silence was mine. And for the first time in my life, it felt like enough. But I still had one more question, one more thread that needed pulling. Why had my grandmother chosen me? Not out of guilt, not out of obligation. There had to be a reason. I found it 3 weeks later, buried in a box of old photographs in her attic. A letter, written in her handwriting, addressed to me, dated the same week she changed her will. Dear Mallory, I have watched you carry the weight of being invisible for your entire life. I have watched you build a person out of scraps they threw away. I have watched you become someone I never had the courage to be. You are not the child they forgot. You are the child who remembered herself. That is why I am giving you everything. Not because they failed you, because you succeeded despite them. Use it well. Use it freely. and never let anyone tell you that you don't deserve what you earned. I folded the letter. I placed it in the shoebox with the others, and I finally understood that my grandmother had not been trying to buy redemption. She had been trying to give me a future she never had. I started renovating her house that spring. I kept her roses. I painted the walls a color she would have liked. I turned her bedroom into a guest room, but I left her desk exactly as it was. I didn't answer my phone when unknown numbers called. I didn't check the blocked folder. I didn't wonder what they were saying about me. 6 months later, I received one last letter. Handwritten, no return address. Postmarked from a town I didn't recognize. I opened it. The handwriting was my father's. I was wrong. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see what she did for you. You deserved better. I'm sorry. I read it 3 times. Then I placed it in the shoebox with my grandmother's letters, not because I forgave him, but because I was done carrying his weight. The house was quiet. The phone was silent. And for the first time in my life, I was free. Freedom, I learned, is not the absence of noise. It is the choice of what you let in. I spent that first year in my grandmother's house learning the shape of a life without constant defense. I woke up when I wanted. I answered my phone for people who added light, not weight. I worked, I traveled, I sat in her garden and read books she had marked with sticky notes. Her handwriting was everywhere, little observations in the margins, questions to herself, underlinings of passages that made her think of me. I found one in a novel she had read the year before she died. She had drawn a star next to a sentence that read, "The ones who hurt us the most are usually the ones who never learned how to love themselves." Below it, in her careful script, she had written, "Mallory, this is not your work to fix." That note became my anchor. Whenever I felt the pull to explain myself, to justify the inheritance, to prove I deserved it, I read her words. She had already given me permission to stop performing. But the family story wasn't finished. Not quite. 6 months after the restraining order, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, older, measured. She identified herself as Patricia Chen, Henry Chen's daughter. My grandmother's secret had a family I had never met. Patricia explained that she had found my name and address among her father's things after he passed. He had kept a small box of correspondence from my grandmother. Letters, photographs, a dried rose from their garden. Patricia had known about the relationship. Her father had told her before he died. She said he spoke of my grandmother with a tenderness that never faded. "I wanted you to know," Patricia said, "that your grandmother was loved, truly loved, and she made him happier than I ever saw him before or after." We talked for an hour. She told me about Henry, his work, his kindness, his regret that he couldn't give my grandmother a public life. She told me that my grandmother had visited him in the hospital during his final weeks, holding his hand while no one else was watching. "I think she stayed with him until the end," Patricia said. "He died with her name on his lips." I thanked her. After we hung up, I sat in my grandmother's living room and looked at the photograph my father had used as a weapon. It didn't look like a scandal anymore. It looked like 2 people who had found each other in a world that told them they shouldn't. I framed that photograph and hung it on the wall. The boutique never launched. I learned this through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it in passing. My sister had run out of funding after my father's legal fees drained the family savings. The Mercedes was repossessed. My parents sold the house and moved into a smaller rental. My sister moved to another state, chasing a fresh start that seemed to keep slipping through her fingers. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel guilt. I felt the quiet neutrality of someone who had stopped measuring her life against theirs. Their collapse was not my victory. It was simply the natural consequence of building on unstable ground. My mother reached out exactly once. An email sent from a library computer, no return address. She wrote that she had been thinking about the past, about the moments she had stayed silent when she should have spoken. She said she was proud of me, even if she had never said it aloud. She asked if we could have coffee, just coffee, no strings. I thought about it for a week. I drafted a response and deleted it 7 times. Finally, I wrote back, I'm not ready yet, but thank you for saying it. That means more than you know. I never heard from her again. The house became my project and my sanctuary. I turned the spare bedroom into a writing studio. I researched my grandmother's life, her family, her history. I learned that she had grown up poor in a small farming town, that she had put herself through secretarial school, that she had married my grandfather at 19 because she had no other options. She had lived a life of quiet compromise until the end, when she finally chose herself. I wrote an article about her, about the letters, the trust, the secret love. It was picked up by a small magazine. Readers wrote to me, sharing their own stories of grandmothers who had seen them, of inheritances that came with emotional weight, of family secrets that reshaped everything. I realized I wasn't alone. There were so many of us, the ones who had been the witness instead of the star, the ones who had been loved from a distance by people who couldn't save us but tried anyway. 1 year after the restraining order, I held a small gathering at the house. Friends from my old job, a few neighbors my grandmother had known, the mailman who had watched me renovate the porch swing. I served lemonade and cookies on the back patio. Someone asked about the framed photograph in the hallway. I told them it was my grandmother with a man she loved. I didn't explain further. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the garden. The roses were blooming. The sky was clear. I pulled out the shoebox of letters and read one at random. It was dated 10 years earlier. Dear Mallory, I saw you today at the grocery store. You didn't see me. You were arguing with your father on the phone. Your shoulders were tight. Your voice was steady. I wanted to walk over and hug you, but I knew it would make things harder. So I just watched and thought, she is going to be fine. She is already more than they know. I folded the letter. I placed it back in the box, and I realized that the inheritance was never about the house or the money. It was about being seen. She had seen me all along, and she had made sure I would never have to disappear again. I kept the house. I kept the roses. I kept the letters. And I kept the photograph of my grandmother holding hands with a man who made her smile like that. I stopped checking for messages from my family. I stopped wondering if they thought about me. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never change the past. But there was one more surprise. One last thing my grandmother had left that I didn't find until the second year. I was cleaning out the attic, preparing to install proper insulation, when I found a locked metal box wedged behind an old trunk. It took me an hour to find the key, taped to the underside of a dresser drawer. I opened the box. Inside was a leather-bound journal, thick with pages, and a smaller envelope with my name on it. The journal was her diary. She had kept it for 40 years. I opened to the first entry. It was dated 1968. She wrote about being young, about feeling trapped, about the day she realized she had married the wrong man. The entries continued through the birth of her children, the growing distance from my grandfather, the quiet desperation of a life lived for others. And then, in 1972, an entry that stopped my breath. Today, I met a man at the library. He asked about the book I was reading. I told him. He smiled. And for the first time in 10 years, I remembered what it felt like to be seen. I read the entire journal over the next week. It was her secret history, her inner life, the thoughts she had never shared with anyone. She wrote about Henry, about the guilt and the joy, about the impossible choice between duty and love. She wrote about her children, her disappointment in my father's entitlement, her worry about my future. The last entry was dated 3 days before her stroke. I have made my decision. The trust is set. Mallory will be protected. I am not afraid anymore. I have done one last thing right. I turned to the envelope. Inside was a single key taped to a handwritten note. This is for the safe deposit box at First National Bank. It's not much, but it's yours. I drove to the bank the next morning. The safe deposit box was small, barely larger than a shoebox. I opened it inside a private room. Inside were 2 items. A diamond ring, simple and elegant, with an inscription on the inside of the band. Plus EC forever. Henry and Alina Chen. My grandmother had kept her engagement ring from him, hidden for decades. And a letter typed on old stationery signed by Henry Chen. Dear Alina, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you are still the bravest woman I have ever known. I leave you this ring, not as a token of what we had to hide, but as proof that some love does not need witnesses to be real. You chose your family, I understand. And I have loved you every day since the moment we met. I hope you find peace. I hope you find joy. And I hope, wherever I am, I will see you again. I sat in that bank vault room for a long time, holding a ring that had crossed decades in secret. My grandmother had loved and been loved, fully, imperfectly, in the shadows. And she had carried that secret alone, protecting everyone except herself. I wore the ring home. I added it to the frame with a photograph. And I understood, finally, that inheritance is not just money or property. It is the stories we are trusted to carry. It is the love someone could not express in life. It is the permission to live honestly, even when the world tells you to hide. The house is mine. The garden is blooming. The letters are organized in a box on her desk, waiting for the next person who needs to know they were seen. And my grandmother, in the end, had the last word. She always did. There is a question I still ask myself sometimes, not about the money or the house or the court battles. I ask myself what I would have done if my grandmother had not left me that inheritance. And the answer is the same every time. I would have survived anyway, because the inheritance was never what saved me. She had already saved me years earlier in 100 small ways I didn't recognize until she was gone. The trust was just her way of saying what she had already said in every letter, every phone call, every handwritten note in the margin of a book. This story is not unique. Families fracture over inheritance all the time. Courts fill with cases of favoritism and resentment dressed up as legal arguments. Studies show that sibling conflicts over estates are among the most bitter and long-lasting disputes in American family law. The average inheritance dispute takes 18 months to resolve and costs both sides tens of thousands of dollars. But the real cost is never financial. It is the loss of the illusion that blood means something automatic. My grandmother taught me that family is not a guarantee. It is a choice made every day in the small decisions, the quiet observations, the courage to love someone even when the world says you shouldn't. She chose me when she could have chosen silence. She chose honesty when she could have chosen comfort. She chose to leave a record of her love so that I would never doubt it. If you are watching this and recognizing pieces of your own story, the parent who never saw you, the sibling who always came first, the relative who used love as leverage, I want you to hear something clearly. You are not required to keep showing up for people who only see you as a resource. The phone can stay unanswered. The door can stay closed. The inheritance they are holding over your head may not even be theirs to control. Sometimes the people who raised you are the last ones to notice who you have become, but someone else noticed. A teacher, a friend, a grandparent who watched from the sidelines, a mentor who saw your potential before you did. That is your real inheritance. Those are the people who will leave you something that cannot be contested, a belief in yourself that no court can overturn. My grandmother had the last word because she earned it. She lived a life of quiet courage and secret love. She left me a house, a trust, and a stack of letters that I will never stop reading. But the most important thing she left me was permission to choose myself without apology. If this story reached you on a day when you needed to hear that you are not alone, that you are not crazy, that you are not selfish for wanting to be treated fairly, then it did exactly what she would have wanted. Subscribe if you want to keep hearing stories that remind you why your boundaries matter. The ones who love you will wait. The ones who don't will call 52 times and still miss the point.